Wednesday, August 15th, 2018, and I'm up and ready to head out for some more personal investigation on the farmhouse case. At this point, I was too invested in the case to back down for any reason. I didn't even spend much time getting prepared, and only grabbed a quick snack which I planned on having on my way to my dad's place. I did pour some food out for Hallie and got a goodbye leg rub from her before seeing myself out. Soon, I was on the road. I didn't need to call my dad to let him know I was coming. He knew I would troop in from time to time, so it wasn't that much of a surprise now. As I pulled up to his home, I recognized Tim's vehicle, which was honestly one hell of a blessing. I needed them both because for some reason, I was feeling very lucky today. Tim mostly was free on Tuesday and Wednesday, so he would stop by my dad's place for a drink and a chat. I raced inside, barging in on both men laughing and bonding over a cigarette. I knew I must have been a topic for the two, and it didn't take long to confirm it. As usual, upon seeing my dad, I was soon wrapped in my dad's arms while Tim ushered me in with a smile. I would have loved to carry on this warm moment, but I couldn't keep calm. I was really anxious about the case, so I just took the bull by the horn. Hey, I'm actually glad you guys are both here. I wanted to ask you both about Patch Lane.
Jesus, see what I'm talking about? Your girl's obsessed with this case now. Chip off the old block, am I right?
Tim said to my father with a stern look, and he didn't seem to disagree because he let out a laugh before replying to him.
Oh, I remember those days of obsessing over cases. I gotta say, retirement has treated me well.
There was no time to waste. At least, I felt that way. So I just carried on. Okay, well maybe there is a reason to be obsessed. I just talked to the state's forensic lab, and it looks like Michelle had a written code of a safe on the back of that receipt she had in her pocket. I think there's a safe somewhere in Patch Lane, and it could have answers for me.
Tim had a grim look on his face. He already saw it coming. He took a long inhale at his cigar, and then released before looking back at me.
You're gonna make me go back there, aren't you?
I gave him an affirming smile, and soon my dad was laughing, remarking I always did the same to him. There were still some details I needed to iron out with both of them. Firstly, Tim. Tim, I also wanted to ask you about the 911 hang-ups you used to respond to back when you were a rookie. What else do you remember about the tenant?
Well, she was certainly a pretty young girl. She had 2 very young children. Neither could talk yet, so I bet they were under 2. She looked young herself, too. I would suspect she was maybe around 20 years old, if that. Just had that baby face, you know? Anywho, she was very curious about the house and the locked door in the basement. Most people hated when the cops showed up, but she always seemed, I don't know, relieved? She would mention how big that house was and how she always felt like someone was watching her. Even the tenants after her made similar comments. I always chalked it up to being the history of that Wentz farm, you know?
Tim, is there any chance that that woman we found in the basement was the same girl that lived there?
I don't know why it would be. I always thought she moved somewhere else, because right after she left a new tenant came in. I guess I don't know exactly what happened to her.
Do you remember her name?
Oh God, I'm awful with names. I'll never forget a face, but I can't remember names. You know that. That's why I immediately write every person's name down that we interview. I can't even check anywhere since I never took a report for checking her house.
Could her name have been Michelle Klein?
Honestly, I don't know. It could have, but I have no idea. That was 20 years ago.
Now, I turned to my dad. Dad, what do you know about the tenants of that house in the late 90s? He took some time, a nervous look on his face while studying his cigar before replying.
Well, I remember all of the tenants were similar.
What do you mean?
They, looked similar.
Dad, this is important. Just tell me what you're trying to spit out.
He took a deep breath. Well, all of the tenants were young, attractive women. They were mostly blonde, from out of town. The type of girls that your mother would not have liked me stopping to talk to at the grocery store, if you catch my drift.
Wait, are you saying you think they were prostitutes?
No, I just mean that they were young, pretty, and kinda ditzy, you know?
I knew I was onto something. I just didn't know what. I let both of them finish up their conversation before heading out with Tim to the station to roll call. Once done, I requested to work extra time, which I was granted. And once I was done with all I could at the station, Tim and I prepared to leave. I remembered Tim always heading down to the beach with a metal detector, a hobby of his, and coming back with a bunch of old coins he found. I thought we could use that, so I asked him to bring along the metal detector. Soon, we were on the run and headed for the farmhouse. If there was an old safe, it would most likely be metal, which meant we would most likely come across some kind of discovery there. Upon arrival, we ran through every part of the farmhouse with the metal detector, from the floors to the walls. The scene had already been processed, so there was no need to be sneaky about it. Unfortunately, we turned up nothing. However, there was one more room left to be searched. Deep in the basement, the room where the purple, bloated body of our corpse lay remained unsearched. The image of the first time we came upon her haunted me at that moment. Tim and I went down to the basement. We got to work in the room, and it didn't take very long before a glimpse of hope. He ran the scan across the wall, and the beeps became intense. We had finally found something. I quickly ran my hand through the wall, pressing down on it as I attempted to find something, anything. A brick in the wall shifted. I looked back at Tim, who was looking back at me. We pulled out our knives and got to work prying the brick out of the wall. There it was, the safe with a spin lock. I remembered the code from the PA State Lab that was given to me and wasted no time. Soon, I had successfully opened up the safe. That's when things got really drastic. The sound of a gun clicked behind Tim and me. We quickly spun around and realized that we were at gunpoint. There was an elderly man with blonde and gray hair, the look of a killer, and a grin you would never forget. He had his gun pointed at me. Well, you pigs just can't stay away from my house. He had blonde hair, although the gray was taking over, and piercing blue eyes. You're as bad as that bitch who couldn't keep her mouth shut. You know, I let her live here because she appeared cute and dumb. Her curiosity is what got her killed, just like what I'm going to do to the two of you, he said. I was frozen for a while because I knew he was a killer, and unlike most people, would probably not hesitate to kill a person. Still, I needed to get control over the situation, and fast. You're Joseph, aren't you? I asked, moving in closer to him. Yeah, and you're dead. At this point, my nose was nearly touching the barrel. I quickly grabbed the barrel, making a full 360-degree turn, pointing the gun's aim at him while snapping his finger on the trigger as well. Get on the fucking ground! I shouted, and soon he was on his knees with his hands up. Tim then ran behind him, placing him in cuffs, before calling for backup. The cops arrived pretty early, as well as two of the men in suits from before. They took complete charge of the situation, and we left Joseph in their hands. It was at this point I realized I hadn't still figured out what was inside of the safe, so I moved up to it and stretched my hands in. In the safe, there were documents and photographs of a lady with blonde hair. That's her. That's the tenant who stayed at the house, Tim remarked upon seeing the photos. That's Michelle Klein, your body and our witness, the men in suits replied, confirming my suspicions. I took a deep inhale and released it with a long sigh. Now, can you please tell us what the hell went on here? After giving each other a look, they let loose. One stepped forward, explaining everything. All right, so your Mr. Joseph Muller here was into some deep stuff. Most predominantly, he ran illegal guns and sold them to some big names including the Mafia. The ATF thought they got everything during their raids years ago. But there are so many hidden passages, tunnels, and root cellars throughout this property and land, he kept hiding them somewhere new. Trust us, if you knew about the tunnels and passages you are literally standing on right now, you'd have nightmares for years. After a sip of his coffee, he continued. He used the tenants as cover-ups and targeted tenants who he thought wouldn't ask any questions, and would be fine with sending checks addressed as cash to a P.O. box as their monthly rent checks. What he didn't expect was for Michelle Klein to start asking questions and go digging through his house. She stumbled across one of his root cellars where they stored guns and called the feds immediately. She didn't know if she could trust the local police at that point and went straight to the ATF. ATF contacted us and they said they knew Muller and knew that if he found out what she knew, then she would be dead. So, they sent her to us to protect her. Part of her protection meant that we needed to fake her death so that Muller wouldn't be suspicious and go looking for her. She refused initially, but when we explained to her that her children's lives were at risk too, she agreed. He then looked towards the safe before affirming, "It looks like she used this safe here to store her old family photographs and their birth certificates as proof of their existence." We told her she had to leave all of this behind and couldn't take any evidence with her of her previous life or her children. This all happened on October 20th, 1998. It looks like she wrote down the safe code on the first piece of paper she could find and kept it after all these years. We received notification about 2 weeks ago that her son was diagnosed with cancer. God damn cancer. The kid was only 22 years old and had a brain tumor. She kept on telling us she wanted to see him, and we explained to her why it just wasn't possible, and we even told her he probably would not recognize her. It looked like she did her best to try to look as close to how she did 20 years ago, including her clothing, so that he would recognize her. She probably wanted to grab these photographs to show him, to prove that she was his mother and jog his memory. When she was here, Joseph must have seen her from one of his tree stands and wanted to silence her. She was one of the only witnesses willing to go forward with testimony. We just could never catch him after all these years. I took a long sigh of relief, feeling like I had finally made an accomplishment I never knew I needed. This was definitely personal for me. There was one thing though. Wait, he was making all those 911 dials? One of them responded. We can't disclose that information, but you can think of them as a good Samaritan who had eyes everywhere and wanted to see justice done. We all headed back to the station where I began very strenuous paperwork. Once I was done, I pulled one of the suits to a side to divulge all the information I gathered personally on my search. I also told him about the strange behavior with the medical examiner and how I thought he may have been involved with Joseph. The suit assured me that I was mistaken and went out returning with the ME. You could now see the disappointment on the medical examiner's face as he spoke.
Officer Barkley, I just wanted to say what a fantastic job you did on this case. I also wanted to apologize in person for how I acted and how I handled this case. I received an anonymous threat that if I performed an autopsy or did anything at all with the body, my family was going to be killed. They even knew my daughter's school and her schedule. I'm so sorry. I was afraid to go to the authorities out of fear for my family. I'm so glad to see that you stuck to your guns and saw this case through.
I could understand his situation, and I felt it wasn't my place to judge him. Before I could say anything in reply, the dispatch called out to me. Dispatch to 1034. 1034, go ahead. Are you able to respond to a 911 hang-up? Affirmative. What's the address?